Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to be changing out the water pump on this Mercury 200 EFI. This is the engine that I removed the power head on. What I'm doing here is I'm just jumping the trim wires. So what I did is just hook it up to a 12-volt battery, just hook up the red to the blue wire and the green to the ground wire, and the motor will trim up slowly. And you just want to get it to a good height where you can work on it. First thing we want to do is shift the engine into forward. I have the power head off at the moment, so I don't have to do this, but for you guys, you probably should do this if you have the power head on. Next, we're going to do is just start removing the nuts. We have two of them located on each side where this one's located, and then of course one up front right here. And then there's going to be two of them located under the skeg. We'll get to that in a second. We're going to remove this cap, which is going to expose a 1/2-inch bolt, which holds the anode on. And sometimes these can be pretty stiff, especially if the motor's been in salt water. Once loosened, the anode will drop out right out of the bottom. Once the anode is removed, another bolt is exposed where the anode is seated. You just want to break this one loose. Again, they're going to be pretty tight if the motor's been in salt water. Here, I'm just removing the nut that was located on the other side of the engine. The last two nuts are located underneath the cavitation plate, so you just want to use a ratchet with a deep socket and remove these, and then you just want to support your lower unit on your leg as you're removing it so you're able to pull it out because they are pretty heavy. Once the lower unit is secured, what we can start doing the water pump. What you're going to want to do is remove this water guide. This just helps line up the water tube to lower housing, and then we're going to start removing the nuts. There's two of them on each side, and then there's one in the front that's a different size. And then you're going to remove is this 5/16 screw. They added this because they had problems in the past with the housings not seating properly, so they added this little screw. Next, what we're going to do is remove this collar that's above the housing. It's a little rubber grommet. All this does is just keep sand and other dirt out of the water pump housing so it doesn't chase up the housing or the water pump. The housing can sometimes get pretty stuck. As you can see here, I can't really get the housing to come up. So there is a little trick you can do, but you do have to be careful so you don't wreck the housing or anything like that. You can just take a little flat blade and pry up like this, and then the housing will pop straight up. And then you can pull the whole housing straight up, and then you can see inside is the water pump. It actually didn't look too bad, but it's just better safe to be sorry. So this actually water pump isn't too bad, but in the housing, you just want to put your finger in there, make sure there's no high spots, make sure that nothing's going on. This housing must have been changed out because even the base housing is pretty good condition and the water pump is pretty good condition. So the water pump was probably recently done on this. Here you can see the difference between a new water pump and a used one. You can see the fins are bent back. And then what we're going to do is install the new Woodruff key. This goes onto the drive shaft, and this locks the impeller onto the drive shaft. What we're going to do is add some 2,4-C, a very small dab. A lot of people don't think that you should add grease to the housings. In the book, they do tell you to use it. So just a very small amount, just rub it in the housing so when you first start it up, the water impeller does not start up dry. So just put the tiniest bit around the coating, around the walls, and then once you put it down, it should slide right in. What you want to do now is just push down on the housing as you're spinning the drive shaft, and the water impeller will slide into the housing. Now we can install the 3 nuts back onto the housing, just starting with your fingers so you don't cross thread them. And of course, don't forget this 5/16 screw that goes back here in the housing. Now, I know a lot of you guys are freaking out with me using this ratchet, but I promise you I've done a lot of these. So just run them in until they're just about seated, and then you can just ratchet it regular. And obviously you don't want to run it in with the gun because you could snap something off. But you could run them in just till they're seated, and then you can just torque them down. Lastly, we just install this little grommet back on so no sand could get into the housing. And of course, don't forget your water tube, or else you're going to have one heck of a time trying to install the lower unit. Now we're ready to install the lower unit back onto the engine. So just want to line up the drive shaft into its proper hole, slide it up. Again, you want to use your leg just to support the lower unit because it is pretty heavy. You just want to line up everything. You want to make sure the water guide hits the copper tube up in the midsection. And of course, you want to make sure your shift linkage lines up, and then slowly just push it in. Now this is easier for me because I do have the power to remove, but if you didn't, you may have to move the flywheel just until everything lines up. And before you go too far, if you do have a speedo, you want to connect it back into the lower unit. This is just used by a little hose that uses water pressure that sends it up to your gauge up at your helm. So just make sure you push it in Once you get that speedo attached, you can just install the lower unit the rest of the way. Again, just using your leg, you just want to support the lower unit and get at least 1 or 2 nuts started with your finger. When you get the couple threads started, you can honestly just let go of the lower unit because it's not going to go anywhere now. And at this point, you can just start tightening down the nuts all the way down until they're fully secured and not going to go anywhere. Now, I didn't show the location of these nuts when I took the lower unit apart, so they're just located underneath the cavitation plate like I said. Just install these 2 nuts with the washers and then tighten it down with a ratchet on a deep socket. Now we can install the anode and the bolt that's located underneath the anode. And of course, if you look here, the bolt always stays through for the anode, just so you guys know, so you don't have to take this bolt out. But we are going to install the bolt first before we put the anode in, or else we won't be able to get the bolt in. Once the bolt is installed underneath the anode, you can just tighten down the anode. Don't go too tight or else you could break it. So just go down until it's nice and snug. Now, for you who don't know how the shifting works on these Mercuries, basically, since I have the power head removed, it's a little bit easier. This little thing swivels based on the shift cables. When the shift cable gets pushed, it pulls it and obviously allows the engine to shift. So right now I'm in neutral because it's facing forward. Now, if I were to pull it this way, this is as if I was using a cable. It's going to shift the engine into forward. So you can see here, it locks into forward. And of course, for reverse, you want to be spinning the prop shaft at the same time and just push it and it'll go right into reverse. Check it, it locks into gear as it's supposed to. And then again, in the neutral will be just facing straight forward. And you see I'm just jiggling it and it goes right into neutral. And that's how you change out the water pump on these Mercury 150 to 200s. If you liked the video, drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.